Do you believe a wild animal can choose to love? That a creature born to be solitary could decide, of its own free will, to become part of a family? She didn't believe it. Not until that stormy night that changed her life forever. That night, the rain came down like the sky was falling apart. She almost didn't hear the crying. A thin sound, desperate, that didn't match any animal she'd ever known. When she found that soaked kitten shivering under her back porch, she knew she had two choices. Leave him there and go on with her life. Or risk everything for a creature the whole world would say could never be tamed. She chose to risk it. And what happened after challenged everything science, experts, and logic said was possible? Because Thor isn't a dog. He's a wild bobcat. A predator with razor-sharp claws and hunting instincts. But he fetches socks like a golden retriever. He waits for her at the door every single day. He walks on a leash through the neighborhood and protects children like he's a guard dog. The neighbors called animal control. They said she was crazy. That he was dangerous. That it was only a matter of time before his wild nature took over. But they didn't know what she discovered that first night. When she held that trembling little body and felt his heart beating against her hand. When she looked into those dark eyes and saw something no one expected to see in a wild animal. She saw choice. She saw trust. She saw the possibility of a miracle. And 3 years later, when a child got lost in the woods and everyone thought it was the end, Thor proved that love can exist where no one imagines. That loyalty knows no species. That sometimes the most unlikely bonds are the truest ones. This is the story of how a wild bobcat became her best friend. How he saved a life. And how he taught her that the line between wild and domestic is much thinner than we think. It's the story of an animal with the soul of a dog and the heart of a hero. And this story will change the way you look at nature forever. If you also believe every animal has their own marvelous story to tell, stay here on this journey. Subscribe to Tales of Marvelous Beasts and tell us in the comments about the most incredible creature that ever crossed your path. The storm started in the late afternoon. She remembers because she was finishing stacking firewood on the porch when she felt the first drops. Those heavy, cold drops that tell you something serious is coming. Within minutes, it turned into a downpour. The kind that transforms dirt roads into rivers and sends every living thing running for shelter. She was inside making tea when she heard it. At first she thought it was the wind. Maybe a branch scraping against the house. But then it came again. A cry. Soft at first, then more urgent. More desperate. She grabbed her jacket and stepped out onto the back porch. The rain was coming down so hard she could barely see 3 feet in front of her. But she heard it again. That sound. High-pitched and pleading. She followed it to the corner of the porch where the old wood meets the stone foundation. And that's when she saw him. A tiny bobcat kitten, no bigger than both her fists put together. He was soaked through. Shaking so hard his spots were blurring. His eyes were barely open, covered with some kind of film or infection. His paws, already too big for his body, were caked with mud. And he was completely alone. She knelt down in the pouring rain, her jeans soaking through at the knees. She reached out slowly, expecting him to bolt or hiss or show some sign of fear. He didn't run. He didn't even try. He just looked at her with those dark, unfocused eyes and cried again. A thin, raspy sound that seemed to take every bit of strength he had left. "Where's your mother?" she whispered, knowing he couldn't answer. Knowing too that if his mother was coming back, she would have already come. She called the wildlife rescue hotline from the porch, rain dripping from her hair onto her phone screen. The voice on the other end was kind but firm. "We can't send anyone until tomorrow. Keep him warm. Don't feed him. If he makes it through the night, we'll send someone at dawn. If he makes it." She looked at the kitten, now tucked inside a cardboard box lined with towels, still trembling. His breathing was shallow, his fur matted and dark from the rain. She thought about leaving him there on the porch, dry and waiting. She thought about going inside, setting an alarm, checking on him every hour. But she didn't do any of that. She wrapped him in her jacket. In the old wool blanket that still smelled like wood smoke. And she brought him inside. She made a nest of blankets near the heater. She turned the heat up and sat with him on the floor. Every few minutes, she touched his side lightly just to make sure he was still breathing. His heart beat fast and weak like a bird's. Until morning, she told him. "That's all we need to make it through." The hours crawled by. Outside, the storm battered the windows. Inside, the house was silent except for the hum of the heater and the occasional whimper from the kitten. She fell asleep sometime after midnight, her hand resting on his small, warm body. When she woke, the room was gray with morning light. The storm had passed. And the kitten was curled against her stomach, paws kneading the blanket, breathing steady and strong. She sat up carefully, trying not to disturb him. He stirred anyway, blinking up at her with eyes that were now clearer, more alert. Then he did something she didn't expect. He purred. Not the deep, rumbling purr of a house cat, but something quieter, rougher, like a small engine trying to start. His ears, still too big for his head, swiveled forward. And when she placed her hand on his back, he leaned into it. When the wildlife rescue called back at 7, she'd already named him Thor. It felt right. Strong. Like a name for something that would last. The woman on the phone was relieved to hear he'd survived the night. We'll have someone there by noon to pick him up. You did the right thing. Most people wouldn't have stayed with him. She looked at Thor, now stretched out in her lap like he'd been there his whole life. His paws extended, his tail, a stub of striped fluff, twitching lazily. Yeah, she said slowly. I'll have him ready. But when noon came and went, and the rescue van pulled into her driveway, something had changed. Thor was awake now, alert and curious. He'd followed her into the kitchen that morning, his gait wobbly but determined. He'd sniffed at the dog's water bowl, tried to untie a loose shoelace, and clumsily climbed onto the couch cushion beside her. The rescuer was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands. He examined Thor carefully. His eyes, his ears, the pads of his paws. He's strong, the man said, surprised. Healthier than I expected. No signs of injury or disease. Just abandonment from the looks of it. What happens to him now, she asked. We'll take him to a rehab center. Get him strong enough to be released back into the wild. That's the goal for all of them. Give them a second chance out there. She nodded. It made sense. It was the right thing to do. But as the man reached for Thor, the kitten made a sound. Sharp and distressed. He scrambled backward, pressing himself against her leg, his claws catching in the denim. And for the first time since she'd found him, he looked scared. The rescuer paused. Sometimes they bond quickly, especially the young ones. But it's temporary. In a few weeks he won't even remember you. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to hand him over and trust that this was the right ending to one long, stormy night. But Thor was looking at her now. His pupils wide, his scrawny body tense. And she realized something she hadn't let herself think until that moment. She didn't want him to forget her. She started, then stopped. Is there any way I could keep him just for a little while until he's stronger? The man's expression shifted. Not unkind but cautious. Ma'am, he's a bobcat. A wild animal. It's not like raising a dog. And legally you'd need permits, inspections, the whole bureaucratic process. Most people can't handle it. I'm not most people, she said quietly. He watched her for a long moment. Then he looked at Thor, who'd gone completely still against her leg, ears flattened, breathing shallow. Tell you what, the man said finally. I'll give you 2 weeks. That's it. I'll check in on him. Make sure he's eating, growing, behaving like he should. But if anything goes wrong, if he gets aggressive, if you can't handle him, he comes with me. No arguments. 2 weeks, she nodded. The man handed her a business card and a pamphlet about bobcat care. Good luck, he said, though his tone suggested he thought she'd need more than that. As soon as the van drove away, she looked down at Thor. He was sitting now, upright and calm, his eyes tracking a bird past the window. His tail gave a small twitch. And when she moved toward the kitchen, he followed. Not because he had to. Not because he was trained. But because somehow, in the space of one night and one morning, he'd decided she was his. She thought about the rescuer's words. In a few weeks he won't even remember you. She smiled. We'll see about that, Thor. You know what means the world? Knowing you're here sharing this moment. If this story is touching something in your heart, leave a comment and let us know. Your words matter more than you think. The first sign came 3 days later when Thor stole her sock. Not the way a cat would, batting at fabric or dragging it under the couch. He picked it up carefully, deliberately, and carried it across the room to where she was sitting. Then he dropped it at her feet and sat back on his haunches, waiting. She stared at him. Did you just fetch? His ears swiveled forward, his mouth opened slightly, and he made a sound. Almost a meow, more like a chirp. Expectant. She picked up the sock and tossed it gently across the room. Thor's eyes locked onto it midair. The instant it landed, he did that clumsy kitten run, huge paws and uncoordinated energy. He pounced on it, wrestled with it for a moment, then picked it up again and brought it back. You're playing fetch with me, she said, laughing despite herself. But he wasn't playing. He dropped the sock, waited, his tail, still just that stub of striped fur, twitching with anticipation. They played for 20 minutes. By the end of the first week, Thor had claimed the dog bed by the back door. Not the scratching post she'd borrowed from a friend. Not the cardboard box with blankets. The dog bed. A faded blue cushion that smelled like the yellow lab she'd lost 2 years earlier. He'd curl up in the middle of it every night, kneading the fabric with his front paws, purring that rough, rattling purr. And when she came home from running errands, he'd be waiting right there by the door, making those high-pitched chirps until she bent down to scratch behind his ears. "You're confused," she told him one afternoon, watching him trot after her from room to room. "You're supposed to be independent, aloof, like a cat." Thor blinked at her, then rubbed his face against her shin. By the second week he'd learned his name. Not the way a cat learns, selectively when convenient. He came when called, running down the hall in that now familiar clumsy gallop. He sat on command, though his version of sitting was more of a crouch. His shoulders hunched and ready to spring. The wildlife rescuer called on the 13th day. "How's he doing?" the man asked. His tone was professional but curious, like he expected bad news. "He's good," she said carefully. "Healthy, eating well, growing fast. Any aggression, biting, scratching?" She looked across the room where Thor was stretched out on his back in a patch of sunlight, lazily batting at a dangling string. "No, none of that." There was a pause. "That's unusual." "I know." Another pause. "Longer this time. You planning to keep him beyond the 2 weeks?" She hadn't let herself think that far ahead. Or maybe she had and just didn't want to admit it. "I don't know yet. Can I have a little more time?" The man sighed. "I'll check in again next month. But ma'am, you need to understand something. What you're seeing now, this sweet, playful kitten phase, it doesn't last forever. He's going to get bigger, stronger. His instincts are going to kick in. And when they do, you might not recognize him." "Understood," she said. But she didn't understand. Not really. Because when she looked at Thor, at the way he followed her from room to room, watched him curl up beside her on the couch every night, saw him rest his chin on her knee and look up at her with those huge amber eyes, all she saw was trust. The chaos started small. First it was the mailman. Thor was napping on the back of the couch when the truck pulled up. His head shot up, his ears flattened, and before she could react, he launched himself at the window, yowling. A sound that was half scream, half roar, completely wild. The mailman jumped back, nearly dropping his package. She grabbed Thor by the scruff, gently, the way she'd read you should, and pulled him away from the glass. "No, that's enough." He squirmed in her arms, still making that sound, his eyes fixed on the truck as it drove away. "It's just the mail guy," she said, her heart racing. "You're okay. Everything's okay." But he wouldn't settle. Stayed tense for another 10 minutes. Then it was the neighbor's dog. A golden retriever that had wandered into the yard. Thor saw him through the screen door and went completely feral. Threw himself against the screen, claws out, making that wild yowling sound again. The retriever, twice his size, tucked tail and ran. "Jesus, Thor," she breathed, pulling him back inside. "What's gotten into you?" But she knew. Or she was starting to know. He wasn't guarding like a cat. Cats hide. Cats watch. Cats calculate. Thor was guarding like a dog. Territorial. Protective. Loyal to a fault. By 3 months old, his paws had grown into the right size for him. His legs were longer now, muscular and lean. His face had become more angular, the kitten softness giving way to something more defined, more predatory. But his eyes, those big curious eyes, stayed the same. She started taking him outside on a leash. At first it felt ridiculous. A bobcat on a harness, walking beside her down the gravel path like an oversized house cat. But Thor didn't seem to mind. He trotted beside her, occasionally stopping to sniff a bush or pounce on a grasshopper. When she stopped, he stopped. When she turned, he turned. The first time they went into town, people stared. A woman outside the grocery store clutched her purse tighter. What is that?" "A bobcat," she said, trying to sound casual. "You're walking a bobcat?" "Yeah." The woman backed away slowly. But children were different. A group of them, maybe 7 or 8 years old, came running over with wide eyes and open mouths. "Whoa, is he real? Can we pet him? Does he bite?" She hesitated. Thor sat beside her, calm and curious, his tail twitching once. "He's friendly," she said carefully. "But you need to be gentle." One by one the kids reached out and touched his head, his back, his huge paws. Thor stayed perfectly still, eyes half closed, that rough purr vibrating in his chest. "He's like a mountain puppy," one kid said, grinning. And somehow the name stuck. But not everyone was charmed. By the end of the month she'd gotten 3 phone calls. One from a neighbor 2 houses down complaining that Thor had thrown himself at their fence while they were having a barbecue. Another from the woman at the post office saying the mail carrier felt uncomfortable delivering to her address. And a third, this one more serious, from someone who'd called animal control. "Ma'am, we got a complaint about a wild animal on your property," the officer said when he showed up at her door. He was young, maybe in his 30s, and seemed more curious than concerned. Can I take a look? She led him inside. Thor was asleep on the couch, sprawled out like a lazy house cat, one paw dangling over the armrest. The officer stared. That's a bobcat. Yes. And you're keeping him as a pet. Not as a pet. As a companion. There's a difference. The officer moved closer, slow and cautious. Thor's eyes cracked open. He lifted his head, assessed the stranger, then yawned, showing a full row of sharp white teeth, and went back to sleep. He seems docile, the officer admitted. Yes. He's never hurt anyone. He's just protective. That's all. The officer pulled out a notepad. Do you have the proper permits, ma'am? Her stomach clenched. I'm working on it. Ma'am, you can't just keep a wild animal without the proper documentation. It's against state law. You'll need a wildlife rehabilitation license, proof of proper enclosure, veterinary records, all of it. If you don't have it, I'll have to remove him. Please, she said, and she hated how desperate her voice sounded. Give me time. I'll get everything in order. I'll do whatever it takes. Please don't take him. The officer looked at her for a long moment. Then at Thor, still snoring softly on the couch. Then back at her. 2 weeks, he said finally. I'll be back in 2 weeks. If you haven't started the paperwork by then, he goes to a sanctuary. Understood. Understood. After he left, she sat on the floor beside the couch. Thor stirred, stretched, then climbed down and settled into her lap. All 15 pounds of him, heavy, warm, and purring. I'm not giving up on you, she whispered into his fur. I don't care what they say. But that night, lying awake in the dark, she wondered if loving something wild meant knowing when to let go. Or if it meant fighting with everything you had to prove it could stay. The paperwork came in waves. Applications for exotic animal permits. Veterinary records. Proof of enclosure specifications. Letters of intent. Letters of recommendation. Every form seemed to require 3 more, and every office she called had a different answer about what she actually needed. She spent her evenings at the kitchen table, surrounded by documents, while Thor napped at her feet or batted at her pen when she set it down. Some nights, she looked at the pile of papers and felt the weight of it. Not just the bureaucracy but the question underneath it all. Was she doing the right thing? The neighbors had gone quiet. Not supportive, just watching. She'd catch them staring when she walked Thor down the street, their conversations dropping to whispers. The woman 2 houses down had stopped waving. The man across the street now checked his mailbox from inside his truck. She told herself it didn't matter. That they'd eventually come around. That once they realized Thor wasn't dangerous, wasn't a threat, they'd understand. But part of her wondered if they'd ever understand. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. She was in the backyard, cleaning out Thor's outdoor enclosure, a chain-link structure she'd built herself. Complete with climbing platforms and shaded areas. Thor was inside the house, napping in his usual spot by the window. The day was quiet. Warm. The kind of fall afternoon where nothing feels urgent. Then she heard the sirens. Not close but not far. The wail rising and falling, joined by other sounds. Shouting. Calling. She came around to the front of the house and saw neighbors stepping out onto their porches, looking toward the woods that bordered the east end of the neighborhood. She walked up to the woman next door. Someone who'd always been polite if not friendly. What's happening? The woman's face was tight with worry. The Hendersons' little boy, Ethan. He got lost in the woods during recess at school. They've been searching for over an hour. Her chest tightened. How old? 6. Maybe 7. She looked toward the tree line. Dense forest stretched for miles in that direction. Old pines and oaks, thick undergrowth, ravines that dropped 20 feet without warning. A kid that age could get lost in minutes. Could fall, could get hurt, could be unable to call for help. They're sending search teams, the woman continued. Police, volunteers, everyone. They're meeting at the school in 10 minutes. She nodded, already turning back toward her house. I'll get my boots. But when she opened the front door, Thor was there. Not sleeping. Standing in the hallway, his ears pricked forward, his body tense and alert. He was looking past her toward the woods, making a sound she'd never heard from him before. Low and urgent, almost a growl but not quite. What is it, she asked. He pushed past her and out onto the porch. His nose went up in the air. His whole body was rigid now. Every muscle coiled. And then, before she could stop him, he was running. Thor, no. But he didn't stop. Didn't even slow down. He shot across the yard at full speed, cleared the low fence with an ease that shocked her, and disappeared into the woods. Her heart hammered. She grabbed the leash from the hook by the door and ran after him, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping her arms and face. Thor, come back. Nothing. Just the sound of her own breathing and the distant sirens. She stopped, gasping for air, and listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, almost inaudible, she heard it. That distinctive high-pitched chirp. Thor's call. She ran toward it. The woods were darker than she expected. The canopy thick enough to filter out most of the afternoon sun. She stumbled over roots, slid down a shallow embankment, but kept moving. The chirping came again, louder now, more insistent. And then she heard something else. Crying. A child's voice, thin and scared. She pushed through a stand of young pines and stopped. There, in a small clearing at the base of a rocky slope, was the boy. He was sitting with his back against a tree, knees pulled to his chest, his face dirty with mud and tears. His jacket was torn. One shoe was missing. And 10 feet away from him, positioned between the child and the dense forest beyond, was Thor. He wasn't moving. Wasn't approaching the boy. He was just standing there, body low and alert, his eyes scanning the tree line, his ears swiveling at every sound. When a branch cracked somewhere to the left, he snapped his head sharply toward the sound and made that noise again. High-pitched and warning. The boy saw her first. "Help," he whimpered. "Please." She moved slowly, carefully, keeping her voice calm. "It's okay, Ethan. I'm here. You're safe now." Thor turned his head, saw her, and his posture relaxed slightly. But he didn't come to her. Didn't leave his post. He kept watching the woods. She knelt beside the boy, checking him quickly. Scratched, scared, but no serious injuries. "Can you walk?" He nodded, his lip trembling. "Okay, let's get you home. But first, I need you to stay really calm, okay, buddy? See him over there? He won't hurt you. He's the one who found you." Ethan's eyes went wide as he looked at Thor. "Is that a bobcat?" "Yes. His name is Thor." "He was making noises," the boy said quietly. "Scary noises." But he didn't come close. He just stood there. She looked at Thor, still on guard, and felt something shift in her chest. He hadn't run into the woods because he was wild. He'd run because he knew. She helped Ethan to his feet and started guiding him back the way she'd come. Thor fell into step, pacing them. Not behind, not ahead, but parallel. His eyes still scanning, still alert. When they reached the edge of the woods, she could see the search team spreading out across the field. Flashlights cutting through the growing dusk. "Over here," she shouted. Everyone turned. People started running toward them. The first to reach them was a woman in her 30s. Ethan's mother, she guessed. She dropped to her knees and pulled the boy into her arms, sobbing. "Oh my God. Oh my God, Ethan." Then the others arrived. Police officers, neighbors, volunteers. Questions came rapid fire. "Where was he? How did you find him? Is he hurt?" She started to answer, but Ethan spoke first. His voice quiet but sure. "The bobcat found me." A silence fell. Everyone looked at Thor, who was now sitting calmly beside her. Tail curled around his paws, expression almost bored. One of the officers, the same young one who'd visited her house 2 weeks earlier, stepped forward slowly. "That's the same bobcat. The one from your house." "Yes," she said. "He found the boy. He ran into the woods before I did. When I got there, he was standing between Ethan and the forest like he was protecting him." The officer looked at Thor for a long moment. Then at the mother still holding her son. Then back at her. "I'll be damned." Ethan's mother stood, her son still clinging to her, and walked over. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Thank you. I don't know how you did it, but thank you." "It wasn't me," she said quietly. "It was him." The woman looked down at Thor. Then slowly, carefully, she reached out her hand. Thor sniffed it once, then rubbed his cheek against her palm. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I was one of the ones who called. Who complained. I thought he was dangerous. A lot of people did. I was wrong." Over the next hour, as the search teams dispersed and the crowd thinned, something shifted. Neighbors who'd been watching with suspicion now approached with hesitant smiles. The mail carrier, who'd been afraid, asked if he could take a picture. The kids who'd called Thor a mountain puppy weeks before came running, asking if he was okay, if he was a hero. The young officer pulled her aside before he left. "About those permits," he said. "I'm going to make some calls. See if I can expedite things after today. I think we can make an exception." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. That night, back home, she sat on the porch with Thor curled beside her. The woods were dark and quiet now. The search long over, the boy safe at home with his family. She ran her hand down Thor's back, feeling the rhythm of his breathing. "You knew," she said softly. "Didn't you? You knew he needed help." Thor's eyes were half closed, but his ears perked toward her voice. "Everyone said you were wild. That you'd never really be tamed. That your instincts would take over and she'd lose you." She paused, watching the stars appear one by one above the tree line. "But maybe they were right. Maybe your instincts did take over. She smiled. You just have different instincts than they thought. Thor pressed closer, resting his head on her knee. And in the quiet of that fall night, with the whole neighborhood finally understanding what she'd known all along, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Every single one of you here right now is part of something special. This isn't just a video, it's a family of people who believe in the impossible. If Thor's story moved you, if you felt even a little of what she felt that night in the woods, then please share this journey with someone you love. Subscribe so we can keep sharing these incredible stories together. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have taken the risk? Your voice matters here. The permits came through 6 weeks later. They didn't come easy. They didn't come fast. But they came. She had to convert part of the garage into a proper enclosed space. Temperature-controlled, multi-level environmental enrichment structures, and enough room for Thor to move freely. She had to go through inspections. Answer questions from wildlife officials who seemed determined to find a reason to say no. Provide veterinary records, behavioral assessments, proof of financial stability. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered that afternoon in the woods. The way Thor had stood guard over a frightened child. The way the neighborhood had gathered afterward, not with fear but with wonder. And she'd fill out another form. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Official state letterhead. She opened it standing in the driveway, her hands shaking slightly. Application approved for limited private ownership under sanctuary care provisions. She read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding. Thor was legally hers. Well, not hers exactly. The state still had oversight. There would be annual inspections, continuing education requirements, emergency protocols. But he could stay. They could stay together. She went inside and found him stretched out on the back of the couch, one paw dangling over the edge, his eyes tracking a bird through the window. We did it, she said. He looked at her, blinked slowly, and went back to watching the bird. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Not exactly normal. There was nothing normal about living with a bobcat. But comfortable. Thor grew into his adult size over the following months. 35 pounds of muscle and fur with paws that could cover her whole palm and a jaw strong enough to crack bone. His kitten spots had faded into the classic bobcat pattern. Tawny coat marked with dark rosettes, a white belly, those distinctive ear tufts that gave him a look of constant surprise. But his habits, those stayed the same. Every morning, he'd be waiting by the door when she woke up, chirping until she clipped the leash on him for their walk. They'd circle the neighborhood as the sun rose, Thor trotting beside her like an oversized house cat, occasionally stopping to investigate an interesting smell or watch a squirrel with intense focus. The neighbors stopped staring. Most waved now. Some kept treats in their pockets. Not that she let them feed him, but the gesture meant something. Mrs. Patterson, the woman 2 houses down who'd been one of the first to complain, now asked about him regularly. "How's our hero?" she'd call from her garden. The kids still called him Mountain Puppy. Sometimes they'd be playing in someone's yard and Thor would stop, ears up, watching them with what looked like longing. She'd let him sit and watch for a few minutes before moving on. He never tried to join them. Just watched, tail twitching slowly like he was memorizing the game. The dog behaviors intensified as he grew, which everyone, including her vet, insisted shouldn't happen. He learned to play tug-of-war with a rope toy, growling and pulling with surprising gentleness, always letting her win eventually. He'd bring her things. Not just socks, but shoes, TV remotes, even a whole roll of paper towels he'd somehow unraveled through 3 rooms. He greeted her at the door every single time she came home. Didn't matter how short the trip. The grocery store, the mailbox, a 5-minute run to the neighbor's house. Didn't matter. He'd be there waiting, making his sounds, rubbing against her legs like her presence was the best thing that happened to him all day. "You know you're not actually a dog, right?" she'd tell him. He'd just stare at her with those unblinking amber eyes, then headbutt her shin. He claimed the passenger seat of her truck as his spot. The first time she lifted him up to see if he'd tolerate a car ride, he settled onto the seat, looked out the window and started purring. Now he rode shotgun everywhere. Hanging out the window when it was warm. Perched on the dashboard watching the world go by with intense fascination. People at stoplights did double takes. Once, a man in the next lane rolled down his window and shouted, "Is that a bobcat?" "Yeah," she called back. "Does he always ride like that?" "Every day." The man laughed and shook his head. "That's the coolest thing I've seen all year." She'd reached over and scratched behind Thor's ears. He leaned into her hand, eyes half closed, completely content. But he was still a bobcat. She never let herself forget that. There were moments when his wild nature surfaced, sharp and undeniable. The way he'd freeze at certain sounds. His whole body going rigid. Every sense on high alert. The way he tracked birds through the window. With purely predatory focus. The sounds he'd make at night sometimes. Not purrs or chirps, but deeper calls that echoed through the house and reminded her exactly what he was. Once, a stray dog had wandered into the yard. Thor went from relaxed to feral in seconds. Ears flat, teeth bared, making a sound that was more scream than growl. She managed to get between them before anything happened. But for those few seconds she saw it. The wildness. The danger. The dog had run. Thor had taken 20 minutes to calm down. "I know," she murmured to him afterward, holding him despite his size, despite the tension still thrumming through his muscles. "I know what you are. I've always known." But knowing didn't make her love him any less. In fact, it made her love him more. Because despite every instinct, despite millions of years of evolution telling him to be solitary, distrustful, untamable, he chose her. Every day he chose her. The seasons changed. Fall gave way to winter, which gave way to spring. Thor's second birthday came and went. Then his third. The wildlife rescuer, the same man who'd given her 2 weeks that first night, stopped by occasionally to check in. His visits changed over time. At first they were professional, cautious, looking for reasons to intervene. Now he'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee while Thor napped in the sun nearby. "You know," he said one afternoon, "I've been doing this for 26 years. I've seen a lot of rehab attempts. A lot of people who thought they could raise wild animals as pets. It never works." She waited, sensing there was more. "But this," he gestured toward Thor, now lying on his back with his paws in the air. "I've never seen anything like it. He's bonded to you in a way that shouldn't be possible. And you respect what he is. You didn't try to make him into something he's not. He did that himself," she said quietly. The man smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe you just gave him space to figure out who he wanted to be." One night, 3 years after that stormy night, she sat on the porch watching the sunset behind the trees. Thor was beside her as always. Not in her lap anymore, too big for that now, but pressed against her side, solid and warm. She thought about the calls she'd gotten over the years. The complaints, the concerns, the people who'd been so certain this would end badly. She thought about the permits, the inspections, the constant proving that he was safe, that she was responsible, that this unlikely partnership could work. She thought about Ethan Henderson, now 9 years old, who still waved at Thor whenever he saw them on their walks. And she thought about that first night. The rain. The crying. The tiny, shivering creature who'd been so close to not making it. Thor shifted beside her, resting his chin on her thigh. His eyes were half closed, his breathing slow and even. One of his paws stretched out and rested on her knee. Gently. Deliberately. Like a dog would. "You know what everyone says about you?" she asked softly. He swiveled an ear toward her voice. "They say you're a bobcat who thinks he's a dog. That you're confused. That you don't know what you are." She ran her hand down his back, feeling the powerful muscles under the fur. "But I don't think you're confused. I think you know exactly what you are." A car drove by slowly, the driver staring. She waved. They waved back, smiling. "You're wild," she continued. "Every instinct, every reflex, every part of you that knows how to hunt and fight and survive alone, it's still there. You haven't lost that." Thor's eyes opened fully now, looking at her. "But you're also loyal. And kind. And you chose to be part of something bigger than just surviving." She smiled, feeling the weight of 3 years of love and trust and daily proof that wild things can choose connection without losing themselves. "Maybe that's the most dog-like thing about you. Not the fetch, not the car rides, not the way you follow her around. But the choice. The decision to belong." The sun set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance a real dog barked. Thor's ears pricked up. Interested but not distressed. "You have the soul of a dog," she said finally. "But you'll always have the heart of something wilder. And that's exactly what makes you perfect." Thor made a sound. That rough, rumbling purr that was uniquely his. Then he stretched, long and luxurious, and head-butted her shoulder gently before settling back against her side. They sat there as night fell. Woman and bobcat. Neither one exactly what the world expected. Both exactly where they belonged. Inside, the dog bed waited for him by the door. His toys were scattered across the living room floor. His food bowl, with his name written on it, sat in the kitchen next to a photo someone had taken after the rescue. Him sitting calmly while children petted his head. He had a home. He had a family. He had someone who fought for him when everyone said it was impossible. And every morning, when the sun came up and she clipped the leash to his harness, he'd trot beside her through the neighborhood that had learned to love him. not despite what he was, but because of it. A wild soul who'd found his place in the world. A bobcat with the heart of a dog. Or maybe, just maybe, a dog who'd been waiting inside a bobcat all along. Either way, he was home. Something beautiful happens when we witness the impossible becoming real. If you're still here, if Thor's story touched something deep in your soul, then you're exactly the kind of person who belongs in this family. Hit that subscribe button not because we asked but because you believe in miracles too. Share this with someone who needs to remember that love has no boundaries. And please tell us your story in the comments. What's the most unexpected bond you've ever experienced? Every single comment is read and your words inspire the stories shared here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing.